17 healers had already failed, and by sunrise, everyone expected Evelyn Hart to become the 18th. The words followed her through the palace gates like a shadow she could not escape. The massive iron doors closed behind her with a heavy thud, sealing her inside Black Hollow Castle, the cold heart of the Northern Territories. Evelyn tightened her grip on the worn leather satchel hanging from her shoulder. Inside were dried herbs, healing salves, and the few tools she had carried for years. None of them felt useful tonight. The castle was larger than anything she had ever imagined. Towering stone walls stretched upward into darkness, and long corridors glowed with the soft light of lanterns hanging from iron chains. Yet despite the beauty, the place felt empty, silent, as if the entire castle was holding its breath. 2 royal guards escorted her through the winding halls without speaking. Their faces were tense, their eyes fixed forward. Even they looked nervous. That frightened her more than anything. Evelyn had spent most of her life being ignored. As an Omega healer, she was tolerated when someone needed help and forgotten when they recovered. She had learned to keep her head down, to work quietly, and to accept that strength was measured differently in her world. But nothing in her life had prepared her for this. At the end of the corridor stood an elderly man dressed in dark royal robes. His silver hair framed a sharp face lined with worry. "Evelyn Hart?" he asked. She nodded. "I am Chancellor Whitmore." His gaze lingered on her for a moment. "You should know the truth before you continue." Her stomach tightened. "The truth?" He exhaled slowly. "The king's condition grows worse every month. The healers before you could not help him." He paused. "Most requested to leave before the week was over." Evelyn swallowed. "And the others?" The Chancellor looked away. "They lost hope." The answer settled heavily between them. He motioned for her to follow. "Come." Together they climbed a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever. The higher they went, the colder the air became. A wind whispered through narrow windows overlooking the moonlit forests. Below, finally they reached the top. One final hallway stretched before them. At the end stood a single black door reinforced with iron bands. 2 guards waited outside, standing perfectly still. No one spoke. No one moved. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat. The Chancellor stopped several feet from the door. "His Majesty remains inside." His voice dropped lower. "No one enters after sunset except those assigned to his care." Evelyn stared at the door. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly. Sad. Lonely. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Whitmore studied her face. "Because every healer who came before focused on the curse." His eyes softened. "You were the first one who asked about the man." Evelyn looked down, uncertain what to say. Before she could answer, a deep sound echoed from beyond the door. Not anger, not rage, just pain hidden beneath years of silence. The Chancellor stepped back. The guards lowered their eyes. And for the first time that night, Evelyn felt something stronger than fear. Compassion. Whitmore handed her a small iron key. "Once you enter," he said softly, "the choice to stay will be yours." Evelyn stared at the key resting in her trembling hand. Then another sound came from behind the door, this time quieter, almost human. Taking a slow breath, she stepped forward and reached for the lock. The iron key felt colder than the night air as Evelyn slid it into the lock. For a moment, she hesitated. Every instinct told her to turn around, to walk back down the tower stairs and leave the castle behind. But she had not come this far to surrender to fear. Taking a slow breath, she turned the key and pushed the heavy door open. The chamber beyond was larger than she expected. Moonlight spilled through tall arched windows, painting silver patterns across the stone floor. A fire burned low in a distant hearth, casting soft shadows against the walls. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Evelyn stepped inside carefully, her satchel pressed against her side. The scent of cedarwood and cold winter air lingered in the chamber. She expected chaos. She expected a monster. Instead, she found a man standing alone near the far window. He was tall, easily, over 6 feet, his broad shoulders outlined against the pale moonlight. Dark hair brushed the collar of his black shirt, and his hands rested against the stone ledge as he stared into the forest below. He did not turn around. He did not acknowledge her presence. Yet somehow she knew he was fully aware she had entered. Her pulse quickened. This was King Lucian Blackthorn, the ruler whose name inspired equal measures of fear and loyalty throughout the Northern Territories. The man everyone believed was slowly losing himself to a curse. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then his voice broke the silence. Another healer. The words were calm, but something weary hid beneath them. Evelyn swallowed. My name is Evelyn Hart, Your Majesty. A faint laugh escaped him. It carried no amusement. You should not bother learning titles. Most people do not stay long enough to use them. The remark caught her off guard. She had expected arrogance, anger. Instead, she heard exhaustion. Lucian finally turned. The sight of him stole the breath from her lungs. His silver eyes reflected the moonlight like polished steel. There was power in them, certainly, but also loneliness. An endless loneliness that seemed older than the castle itself. He studied her for a long moment. You look disappointed. Evelyn blinked. Disappointed? You expected something else. His gaze sharpened. Something more frightening. Heat rose to her cheeks. She hated how easily he had read her thoughts. I did not know what to expect. A wise answer. He looked away again. You may leave if you wish. The word surprised her even more. Leave? Everyone else eventually did. His expression remained unreadable. Save yourself the trouble. Evelyn glanced around the room. There were books stacked neatly on shelves. A chessboard rested on a small table. Nothing looked wild or dangerous. Everything looked lonely. Her heart tightened unexpectedly. I think, she said softly, that I would rather stay. For the first time, genuine surprise crossed Lucian's face. He stared at her as if she had spoken a language he no longer understood. Outside, a cold wind brushed against the windows. Somewhere deep, within the castle, a clock chimed midnight. Neither of them moved. Then, almost too quietly to hear, the king asked a question no healer before her had ever heard. Why? The question lingered in the silence between them. Why? It was such a simple word, yet something in Lucian's voice made it feel heavier than any royal command. Evelyn looked at him carefully. The moonlight softened the sharp lines of his face, but it could not hide the exhaustion in his eyes. This was not the expression of a man feared across an entire kingdom. It was the expression of someone who had spent too many years carrying a burden alone. She set her satchel down beside a nearby chair. Because you asked me to leave before I even had a chance to stay, she answered honestly. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile. More like surprise. That makes no sense. Maybe not. Evelyn shrugged gently. But people usually send others away when they are trying to protect themselves. Lucian stared at her. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. For a moment she wondered if she had crossed a line. Then he looked away first. You should not assume you understand me. I do not. She spoke quietly. I only think you seem tired. Another silence followed. This one felt different. Less guarded. The king moved toward a chair near the window and sat down slowly. The movement looked controlled, but Evelyn noticed the tension in his shoulders. The stiffness. The way his hands briefly tightened against the armrests before relaxing again. Years of healing had taught her to notice what people tried to hide. You are observing me, Lucian said without looking at her. That is what healers do. And what have you discovered? Evelyn hesitated. You have not been sleeping. His silver eyes lifted toward hers immediately. How would you know that? The shadows beneath your eyes. She offered a small smile. And because every person who carries too much responsibility eventually forgets how to rest. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. He looked almost amused. You make dangerous assumptions for someone who arrived less than an hour ago. Evelyn felt herself relax slightly. The conversation was not what she expected. There was no anger, no threats, only an invisible wall between them that neither seemed quite sure how to cross. She opened her satchel and removed a small cloth pouch filled with dried lavender and winter mint. The familiar scent drifted into the room. What is that? Lucian asked. Something to help with sleep. I have tried medicines. This is not medicine. She placed the pouch on the table beside him. It simply reminds the mind that it is safe to rest. He looked at the pouch, but did not touch it. And if my mind has forgotten what safety feels like? The question was so quiet, she almost missed it. Her heart tightened. For the first time, she caught a glimpse of the loneliness hidden beneath the crown, the title, and the fear others attached to his name. Then perhaps, Evelyn said gently, it needs someone to remind it. Lucian's gaze remained fixed on her face. Neither spoke. Outside, snow began to fall beyond the tower windows, drifting slowly through the moonlight. And somewhere deep inside the silence surrounding the king, the first crack finally appeared. The next morning arrived beneath a sky of falling snow. Evelyn woke in a small guest chamber prepared for her near the tower, surprised that she had slept at all. The castle still felt unfamiliar, but the fear that had followed her through the gates seemed quieter now. As she walked through the corridors carrying a tray of herbal tea, servants stepped aside respectfully. Some looked curious, others looked concerned. More than once she caught whispered conversations, ending the moment she approached. By the time she reached the tower chamber, she realized something unusual. Everyone expected her to fail. She pushed open the door and found Lucian seated near the fireplace with an open book resting on his knee. He glanced up briefly before returning his attention to the page. "You came back." The words sounded casual, but something about them made her smile. "I said I would." She set the tea on a nearby table. "Most people say many things." His gaze remained on the book. Very few mean them. Evelyn poured a cup and offered it to him. After a brief hesitation, he accepted. It was a small gesture, yet something told her it mattered. Throughout the day, she remained in the tower. She organized herbs, checked old records of treatments attempted by previous healers, and quietly observed. The more she watched, the more confused she became. None of the reports agreed with one another. One described uncontrollable fevers. Another spoke of exhaustion. A third mentioned unexplained weakness. It was as if every healer had encountered a different problem. Late that afternoon, Chancellor Whitmore arrived carrying several documents. Lucian immediately became distant. Formal. Reserved. The shift was impossible to miss. Evelyn pretended to focus on her notes while the two men discussed matters of state. Trade agreements. Border disputes. Winter supplies. Yet every few minutes she noticed something strange. Lucian's attention kept drifting back toward her. Sometimes only for a second. Sometimes longer. The first time she dismissed it. The fifth time she could no longer ignore it. Eventually Whitmore gathered his papers and stood. "The council requests your presence tomorrow." Lucian frowned. "No," the answer came immediately. The Chancellor blinked. "Your Majesty? Reschedule it." Whitmore looked genuinely confused. "You have postponed 3 meetings already." Lucian closed the book in his hands. "Then postpone a 4th. The old man followed his gaze and discovered Evelyn sitting quietly beside the window. Understanding flashed across his face so quickly that she almost missed it. A small smile tugged at the corner of Whitmore's mouth before he bowed and departed. The moment the door closed, Lucian looked annoyed. "What?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing." That did not sound like nothing. He sighed and stared into the fire. "You asked too many questions. That is also what healers do." To her surprise, a faint laugh escaped him. A real one this time. Warm and brief, and completely unexpected. The sound seemed to surprise him even more than it surprised her. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. Outside the tower windows, snow continued drifting across the mountains. Inside, something invisible had begun to change. Neither of them spoke about it. Neither acknowledged it. But for the first time in years, Lucian delayed his responsibilities not because of pain, not because of exhaustion, but because he wanted one more hour in the company of a healer who treated him like a man instead of a king. And somewhere deep inside the castle, unseen by both of them, a pair of watchful eyes observed everything and quietly smiled. 3 days passed, and for the first time in months, the atmosphere inside Black Hollow Castle began to change. Servants smiled more often. Guards no longer exchanged worried glances whenever the king's tower was mentioned. Even Chancellor Whitmore seemed lighter, though he carefully avoided explaining why. Evelyn noticed it all. She also noticed something else. Lucian was watching her. Not in an uncomfortable way. Not like a king monitoring a servant. It was quieter than that. Whenever she looked up from a book, she would find his attention lingering in her direction before he quickly returned to whatever occupied him. Whenever she prepared tea, he somehow appeared nearby. Whenever she mentioned needing something, it arrived before sunset. At first she assumed it was coincidence. By the 4th day, she knew it was not. That afternoon, Lucian reluctantly agreed to attend a council meeting. Whitmore had practically celebrated the victory. Evelyn remained in the royal library while the meeting took place. The vast room was nearly empty, filled with towering shelves and the scent of old parchment. She spent hours studying ancient records, searching for any clue connected to the king's mysterious condition. Most accounts contradicted one another, but one detail appeared repeatedly. Every generation, A member of the Blackthorn bloodline experienced unusual symptoms shortly before reaching their full power. No one knew why. Before she could investigate further, a voice interrupted her. "You are wasting your time." Evelyn looked up. A man dressed in expensive navy clothing stood near the doorway. He appeared to be in his early 30s, handsome in a polished sort of way, with carefully styled blonde hair and a confident smile that never reached his eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. Politely. "Lord Adrian Hawthorne." He offered a slight bow. A distant cousin of the king. Something about him immediately unsettled her. "It is nice to meet you." Adrian glanced at the books surrounding her. "I have heard quite a bit about you." Evelyn returned her attention to the pages. "Then you already know I am busy." His smile tightened. "You have become very popular rather quickly." She remained silent. "Tell me," he continued, "how does it feel to be the latest distraction?" Evelyn slowly closed the book. "I am not sure what you mean." "Of course you do." He stepped closer. "Every healer before you eventually discovered the same thing." The amusement in his voice vanished. "Nothing can help him." Evelyn met his gaze calmly. "Then why do you sound worried?" For the first time, Adrian's expression faltered. Only slightly. But she saw it. The moment passed quickly. "You should remember your place, Miss Hart." His voice cooled. People who forget their place rarely enjoy the consequences. Before Evelyn could respond, another voice echoed through the library. "And what place would that be?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. Adrian froze. Evelyn turned toward the doorway. Lucian stood there. His silver eyes remained fixed on his cousin. The king had clearly arrived moments earlier, yet neither of them had noticed. Adrian immediately straightened. "Your Majesty." Lucian ignored the greeting. "I asked a question." The silence stretched. Adrian forced a smile. "I was merely offering advice." "Then allow me to offer some of my own." Lucian stepped forward slowly. "Miss Hart is under my protection." The words landed heavily between them. Adrian's face paled. Evelyn's heart skipped unexpectedly. Lucian never looked away from his cousin. "If there is confusion about that fact," he continued calmly, "consider it resolved." Adrian bowed stiffly before leaving without another word. The moment the library door closed, silence returned. Evelyn stared at Lucian. He stared at the door. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then, without looking at her, the king asked, "Did he upset you?" The concern hidden beneath the question surprised her far more than his arrival had. And for the first time, Evelyn began to wonder if the person changing most inside Black Hollow Castle was not herself, but the king. That night, Evelyn could not stop thinking about Lord Adrian Hawthorne. His words had carried something beyond arrogance. There had been fear hidden beneath them, fear that she might discover something he desperately wanted buried. Snow drifted against the tower windows as she sat alone in the royal library, surrounded by stacks of ancient records. A single lantern illuminated the table before her. Most of the castle had gone to sleep hours ago, but Evelyn remained awake, carefully studying every document connected to the Blackthorn bloodline. The more she read, the more troubled she became. According to official records, the strange condition affecting Lucian had appeared only recently. Yet older journals told a different story. Similar symptoms had surfaced generations earlier. Exhaustion, isolation, sudden periods of weakness, unexplained emotional strain. But unlike Lucian's case, those episodes had always passed. They had never continued for years. Something was different now. Evelyn turned another brittle page and froze. A name appeared repeatedly throughout several decades of records. Hawthorne, advisors, regents, royal cousins. The same family line had remained close to the throne for more than 200 years. Her heartbeat quickened. It could be coincidence. Yet the pattern refused to leave her mind. Footsteps echoed softly through the library. Evelyn quickly closed the journal. When she looked up, Lucian stood near the doorway. He was not wearing formal royal clothing tonight. Only a dark sweater and black trousers. Without the crown and ceremonial jackets, he looked less like a king and more like a man carrying responsibilities that never ended. "You are still awake," he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. "So are you." His gaze shifted toward the pile of books surrounding her. "You have been researching for hours." "I think I found something." The words escaped before she could stop them. Lucian walked closer. "Something about my condition?" She hesitated. "Maybe." His expression remained calm, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders. "Tell me." Evelyn looked down at the journal resting beneath her hand. I think someone wants you to believe this is a curse. Silence followed. Not the comfortable silence they had grown used to. This one felt sharp. Dangerous. Lucian lowered himself into the chair across from her. Go on. The records do not match. She carefully chose each word. The symptoms change depending on who documented them. The details contradict each other. It feels less like a disease and more like a story someone keeps rewriting. Lucian studied her face. You think someone manipulated the records? I do not know yet. Evelyn exhaled slowly. But I think someone has been hiding the truth. For several seconds, neither moved. Snow continued falling outside. The lantern flame flickered softly between them. Then Lucian reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a folded piece of paper. I found this in my father's private collection last week. He slid it across the table. Evelyn unfolded it carefully. Her eyes widened immediately. The document was nearly 30 years old. At the bottom appeared a royal seal, and beside it was a signature she recognized instantly. Adrian Hawthorne's father. Evelyn looked back up. Lucian's silver eyes remained fixed on her. You are not the only one asking questions anymore, he said quietly. And for the first time since arriving at Black Hollow Castle, Evelyn realized they were no longer searching separately. They were searching together. Yet neither of them noticed the shadow standing beyond the library doorway, silently listening to every word. The days that followed felt different. Not because the mystery surrounding the royal records had become clearer, but because something else had quietly changed between Evelyn and Lucian. Neither of them spoke about it. Neither dared give it a name. Yet it lingered in every shared glance and every conversation that lasted longer than necessary. One afternoon, Evelyn found herself laughing at a story Chancellor Whitmore had told about the king's childhood. The sound echoed through the library before she could stop it. For a moment, she covered her mouth in embarrassment. Then she noticed Lucian watching her from across the room. He was not smiling. He was simply staring as if he had forgotten what he had been doing. When their eyes met, he immediately looked away. The reaction was so unexpected that Evelyn nearly laughed again. Later that evening, she discovered a fresh bouquet of winter roses placed near her guest chamber. No card accompanied them. No explanation. When she asked a servant about the flowers, the young woman blushed and quickly excused herself. The next morning, Evelyn mentioned needing a particular medical text she had been unable to locate. By lunchtime, the book appeared on her desk. By sunset, she found herself wrapped in a heavier cloak after casually mentioning that the castle corridors were colder than she expected. Little things. Thoughtful things. Things that felt impossible to ignore. Yet Evelyn remained convinced they were simple acts of kindness. Lucian, however, knew better. He noticed every detail about her without meaning to. He noticed when she was tired. He noticed when she skipped meals while researching. He noticed that she always tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear whenever she concentrated. He noticed far too much, and it was becoming a problem. The realization arrived during a council meeting. Advisors debated trade routes while Lucian stared blankly at a map spread across the table. The discussion continued around him, but his thoughts remained elsewhere. Specifically, they remained with a healer currently reading ancient journals 3 floors above him. Your Majesty? Whitmore's voice finally broke through his thoughts. Lucian blinked. What? Several council members exchanged knowing looks. Whitmore cleared his throat. I asked whether you approved the proposal. Lucian glanced at the documents without reading a single word. Approved. A few minutes later, another advisor frowned. But Your Majesty already rejected that proposal last month. Silence filled the room. Lucian closed his eyes briefly. Across the table, Whitmore suddenly became very interested in hiding a smile. That evening, the Chancellor found the king standing alone beside the tower window. Snow drifted beyond the glass, covering the mountains in silver. You realize everyone can see it now, Whitmore said. Lucian did not turn around. See what? The answer is usually less convincing when someone has to ask. The king sighed heavily. I am dealing with enough complications already. Apparently not. Whitmore stepped closer. Because you decided to add one more. Lucian remained silent. For the first time in years, the future frightened him in a way no political enemy ever had. Because if Evelyn discovered the truth hiding inside his heart, she might leave. And somehow that possibility terrified him far more than any mystery buried within the royal archives. Meanwhile, down the hall, Evelyn opened an old journal she had not examined before. A folded piece of parchment slipped from between the pages. Her eyes widened as she read the first line. The handwriting belonged to Lucian's father, and the name written beneath it was Adrian Hawthorne. The journal slipped slightly in Evelyn's hands as she reread the page for a third time. The entry had been written 27 years earlier by Lucian's father. At first glance it appeared ordinary, little more than notes about court appointments and political alliances. But one sentence changed everything. It described a private agreement with the Hawthorne family, an arrangement hidden from the royal council and sealed from public record. Evelyn's pulse quickened. The document made no mention of a curse. Instead, it referred repeatedly to something called the Veil Protocol. She had never heard the term before. She spent the next hour searching through archives until she found a second reference. Then a third. Each fragment revealed a little more. The protocol had been created to conceal a hereditary gift unique to the Blackthorne bloodline. Not a curse. A gift. One that apparently grew stronger with each generation. Yet every mention ended abruptly, as if someone had deliberately removed the remaining pages. Evelyn closed the journal and stared at the falling snow beyond the library window. If she was right, Lucian had spent years believing something was wrong with him when the truth might have been hidden from him all along. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Before she could react, Chancellor Whitmore appeared. One look at her face told him something important had happened. "What did you find?" he asked quietly. Evelyn handed him the journal. The older man's expression darkened as he read. "I was afraid of this." Her eyes widened. "You know what it means?" Whitmore remained silent for several seconds. "I know enough to understand why someone would want these records buried." He carefully closed the journal. "You must show this to the king." Less than an hour later, Evelyn stood once again inside the tower chamber. Lucian listened without interruption as she explained everything she had discovered. The missing pages, the hidden agreements, the references to the Veil Protocol. When she finished, silence filled the room. The king walked toward the window and looked out across the snow-covered mountains. "All these years," he said quietly, "I believed I was fighting something inside myself." Evelyn stepped closer. "Maybe you were never meant to fight it." Lucian looked back at her. For a moment neither spoke. Something vulnerable flickered behind his silver eyes. Something she had never seen before. Then the tower door burst open. A royal messenger rushed inside, breathless from climbing the stairs. "Your Majesty." The young man bowed quickly. "Forgive the interruption." Lucian frowned. "What is it?" "Lord Adrian has departed the castle." Evelyn felt a chill run through her. The messenger continued. "He left less than 30 minutes ago and took several members of his household staff with him." Whitmore entered moments later, his expression grim. "He knows." Lucian's gaze hardened. "Knows what?" The Chancellor looked directly at Evelyn before answering. "That someone has finally uncovered the truth." The room fell silent. Outside, snow continued drifting from the dark winter sky. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, Adrian Hawthorne was already moving. And for the first time since arriving at Black Hollow Castle, Evelyn realized they were running out of time. The following morning, the great hall of Black Hollow Castle filled with nobles, advisors, military leaders, and representatives from every major territory in the north. News of Adrian Hawthorne's disappearance had spread quickly, and rumors moved even faster. Evelyn stood near Chancellor Whitmore at the edge of the gathering, her heart pounding as she watched the crowd. For weeks, she had arrived at this castle as an outsider, a healer everyone expected to fail. Now hundreds of eyes followed her every movement. Across the hall, the massive doors opened. Silence swept through the room. Lucian entered wearing formal black attire embroidered with silver thread. The crown rested upon his dark hair, yet something about him seemed different. Lighter. Stronger. The exhaustion that had shadowed him since her arrival was gone. He crossed the hall with calm confidence and stopped before the throne. No one spoke. No one dared. His silver eyes moved across the assembled crowd before settling briefly on Evelyn. The look lasted only a second, but it made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Then Lucian addressed the hall. For years, this kingdom believed a lie. His voice carried effortlessly through the chamber. A lie that weakened trust, divided allies, and concealed the truth about my family. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Lucian raised a hand and silence returned immediately. He revealed the existence of the hidden records, the altered history, and the deception surrounding the Blackthorne bloodline. He did not speak with anger. He spoke with clarity. with honesty. And for the first time, the people heard the truth from their king. When he finished, no one challenged him. No one questioned him. The weight that had burdened the kingdom for years seemed to lift from the room itself. Then Lucian surprised everyone, including Evelyn. He stepped away from the throne, away from the royal advisors, away from the center of power, and walked directly toward her. The hall became completely silent. Evelyn felt every heartbeat as he approached. When he stopped in front of her, she could barely breathe. "Your Majesty," she whispered. A faint smile touched his face. "You are still doing that." "Doing what?" "Calling me that when you know my name." Soft laughter rippled through parts of the crowd. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks. Lucian's expression gentled. "You came here believing you were meant to heal a king." His voice lowered enough that only those nearby could hear. "The truth is that you healed a man who had forgotten how to live." Evelyn stared at him, unable to speak. "You reminded me how to trust, how to hope, how to look forward to tomorrow." His silver eyes never left hers. "And somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my world." Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Whitmore looked suspiciously pleased. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, from disbelief, from the overwhelming realization that the lonely man she met in the tower was standing before an entire kingdom with no fear of what they might think. Lucian extended his hand toward her. "I cannot promise a perfect future." His voice remained steady. "But I can promise that every future I want includes you." The hall waited. The kingdom waited. Evelyn looked at the offered hand and remembered the frightened healer who had climbed the tower stairs weeks earlier. She remembered the lonely king beside the window. She remembered every conversation, every shared silence, every moment neither of them had fully understood until now. Then she smiled and placed her hand in his. Applause erupted throughout the great hall. Snow drifted gently beyond the towering windows while sunlight broke through the winter clouds for the first time in days. And as the kingdom celebrated, Evelyn realized something simple and beautiful. She had arrived believing she was there to save a king. Instead, they had saved each other.